work out what all the people will be on the doors just now.
All set up.
So funny.
You just want to whack it in. I'm happy to take you stay near like I normally do.
Yeah,
Just because of that.
see you later.
Jesus.
I walked in and I was like, I need this. So usually I always have to chill out. I'm like, I need to be locked in. Pardon?
I'm slightly worried it's only going to fly open, which will be very dramatic.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Cambridge Union. It is a pleasure to address you all for one last time as the Society's president, and welcome everybody to the presidential debate to close off Lent term. I will leave it to my successor to explain the rules of the debate and the House rules, simply because I have a lot to get through to this evening. As some of you may know, this is when we do our termly committee handover, and I would like to begin by thanking all of our officers for our service. I'd like to also introduce the incoming Easter term standing committee. Taking over as social events officer, please give a warm welcome to Alexander Corbold. Taking over from Jaypreet Lully as equalities officer, please give a warm welcome to Ruby Enfield. Taking over as Speakers Officer from Joe Hesketh, please give a round of applause to Freddie Bishop. And please give a warm round of applause to the Easter Term Debates Officer, Ted Yip. And with our appointed roles, taking over as Treasurer from Joshua Dargan, please welcome Jasper Finley Burnside. And taking over in the role of Communications from Freya Thompson, please welcome Harriet Crust. Taking over as Vice President from Roberta Rennie, please welcome Hemi Comrie. And it's my pleasure to hand over the baton to the Easter 2026 President, Jack Peters.
Good evening, one and all, and welcome to the Cambridge Union for our Week 9 presidential debate. I want to reiterate the thanks of Chris to the outgoing Lent elected committee, in particular to Chris for his leadership through this term, and to the appointed officers for their year-long service to this great institution. Now, before we begin this evening, I'm going to quickly run through the format for all of you so that everyone can rightfully participate this evening. So the evening is going to begin with a 10-minute speech in proposition of the motion. We'll then move to a 10-minute speech in opposition. Then it is your chance to get involved from the floor. We will take a round of floor speeches. These are 2 to 3 minute speeches made from the floor in proposition, opposition, and also abstention. We'll then move back to our paper speakers, taking another speech in proposition and opposition. We'll then move to another round of floor speeches again in proposition, opposition, and abstention, before closing the evening out with our closing proposition and opposition speeches. Now, as a member, as someone in the audience, it's your right to raise points of information during speeches. This means that if there's a point you want to challenge, if there's a point you want to clarify, you can simply go point of information, though it is the prerogative of speakers to accept or decline these. So I ask that you wait for the speaker to actually accept it before that you make it, and that you keep them short at roughly 10 to 15 seconds. I'd also just like to reiterate that we have a no photography policy and a no filming policy. We have a team of professionals who will be doing that throughout the evening, so please let them do their jobs. Now, the motion before the House this evening is this House believes the right wing is today's biggest threat to free expression. And our first speaker for the proposition this evening is Dr. Stephen Thrasher. Dr. Stephen Thrasher holds the Daniel H. Renberg Chair of Social Justice and Reporting at Northwestern University. He is the author of The Overseer Class and the acclaimed and award-winning The Viral Underclass, The Human Toll When Inequality and Disease Collide. In 2025, he received a Pulitzer Center Global Reporting Fellowship to study the effects of USAID cuts on HIV/AIDS and LGBTQ+ health. His cultural writing has been widely published and translated. Thrasher holds a PhD in American Studies. Dr. Stephen Thrasher, you have the ears of the House.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, honored guests, and to the Lorde family and everybody gathered this evening. Let me begin by saying that I am proud to be woke. I want to stay awake, and I want to think critically. For being woke has a grand tradition in the heritage steeped in Christianity, Buddhism, the Enlightenment, and Black American thought. The opposition is going to attack woke a lot tonight, I think. But we want to be awake. They want you to be asleep. Since I last addressed this House some 18 months ago, I have been blessed to travel across Europe, America, and North America. And everywhere I have gone, the right has been a dangerous threat to free speech and expression, especially to the kind of speech that we need most now today. Anti-fascist speech in a time of neo-fascism, and speech which affirms freedom from violence, the right to assemble against injustice, and a capacity to live and to love on this beautiful planet that we have been gifted to inhabit. In the United States, the so-called land of the free and my nominal home, the Federal Communications Commission is threatening to pull the licenses of news broadcasters whose coverage of the war in Iran, which President Trump does not like. A war which has alienated and silenced the voice of hundreds of innocent people, including more than 170 schoolgirls. That's the real cancel culture. The president has gone so far as to deem people associated with Antifa to be terrorists, ergo tipping his hand that he's an anti-fascist, or to avoid the double negative, he's just a fascist. Dangerously, this has led to mere protesters against ICE being charged and convicted as terrorists. This violent scare tactic is meant to frighten the public out of our constitutional right to speech, and just as right-wing assaults on both sides of the Atlantic are meant to scare the public out of voting. That's the real cancel culture. Meanwhile, PEN America reports that there have been 10,000 instances of schools and localities attempting to ban more than 4,000 unique titles of books. While writers, artists, and thinkers on the left work to create more expansive and accessible art and literature to allow more people to express our humanity, they are trying to banish women, LGBTQ people, and non-white people from literature, the ballot box, and the public imagination. They engage in the Nazi practice of banning books like The Diary of Anne Frank, which they have deemed is sexually lewd. The novels of Nobel laureate Toni Morrison, and even Heather Has Two Mommies, a children's book that's meant to teach about the diversity and expression of loving families. Right-wing book bans are destroying academic expression in America. At Texas A&M, a philosophy professor was barred from teaching Plato because apparently 2,300 years ago, Plato was promoting gender ideology. Meanwhile, Florida has banned every single introduction to sociology textbook. The state has deemed that they were illegal because sociology analyzes race and gender, which is prohibited in Florida law. And so Florida has produced its own Pravda-style Intro to Sociology book and demanded all sociology professors at state colleges can only teach this one book. That's cancel culture. Over the last 2 years, the interests of right-wing university board members, whose day jobs include making bombs, have trumped learning at US institutions and universities. They make it impossible to have the kind of free-spirited debate that we are enjoying this evening. They have helped ICE deport dissident students or disappear them into concentration camps. They have purged thousands of students and professors, including me, from campuses because we questioned the genocide in Gaza and academia's complicity in the imperial war machine. My alma mater, NYU, even recently banned live graduation speeches from students, demanding that student speakers sit on the graduation stage under a pre-recorded tape of themselves, as if they're hostages in a proof of life video. Can you imagine this hall if you were just looking at all of us sitting underneath a video of ourselves and you couldn't interrupt us, which you usually like to do, but thank you for not doing so yet tonight. And then there's our modern right-wing Gestapo/slave patrol, ICE. In Minneapolis, Chicago, and Los Angeles, the terror of ICE raids has practically eradicated immigrants and people of color from public life. This state terror has not only stolen the right of speech and expression from migrants and people of color, but even from white Americans. For instance, when Renee Good, a white queer woman in Minneapolis, said, "That's fine, dude, I'm not mad at you," to ICE agent Jonathan Ross, he punished her for speaking to him like that, called her a fucking bitch, and ended her speech forever with a bullet through her head. That's cancel culture. In Greece, the Greek Navy and Frontex violate the first commandment of ancient Greek culture, which is to offer xenia to the traveler to welcome the stranger. Instead, they silence the speech of immigrants in the most final, cruel way possible by pushing them back towards the countries where they might be killed or pushing them down into the Mediterranean waters and drowning them. These are mothers, children, lovers, scientists. Greece's New Democracy Party and the U condemn their expression forever to a watery grave. In Uganda, dictator Yusave Museveni passed the Anti-Homosexuality Act in 2023. He did so with enormous support from right-wing American so-called Christian missionaries. This has made expressing homosexuality and transness punishable by death and driven LGBTQ people underground and away from seeking health care, in a country that already has the 10th highest rate of HIV in the world. What could be more against freedom of expression than bullying people into getting AIDS? I spent November in Kampala, and in each meeting I had, everyone watched the door carefully because our meetings were illegal and they were terrified that the police were going to come in any minute. Even gathering to talk about LGBTQ people and how to express our health needs is against the law in Uganda. A path states like Kansas are on as they unperson trans people, take away their IDs, banish them from bathrooms, and deny their right to express themselves. That's cancel culture. Which brings us to the United Kingdom, or Turf Island, as it is called beyond these shores. The right in your country has unleashed a lethal global moral panic around the world, which has emboldened not just men, which has not just endangered trans people around the world, but has emboldened men to try to further control all women and to limit your right to expression, your right to health care, your right to abortion. Trans Britons have been attacked by the Tories for years and abandoned by Labour. Indeed, the only party standing up for free gender expression are the Greens, under the moral leftist queer leadership of Zach Polanski. The right does not care about free expression. They want to hand over your DNA to Palantir. They want to scan your face and your ID and hand it over to a private corporation if you want to look at porn. But here's the thing about banning porn. They've created a dynamic where all non-pornographic media has to prove that it is not porn. The right doesn't just want to monitor your porn habits, they want to make every writer and every reader tell the government what they are writing and what they are reading at all times. They want to scare everyone out of not expressing themselves, and they do it under the guise of protecting children. But they don't care about children. Their hero is Margaret Thatcher, Maggie the Milk Snatcher. They fight to bomb and starve children. The left is fighting because we believe that the people of Gaza, Lebanon, Iran, Nigeria, London, and New York, that their right to expression trumps the profits of Elbit Systems and Raytheon. I'll end by saying if Sally Rooney came to England, she could be arrested because she has voiced support for Palestine action. It should be of grave concern to everyone in this hall and across the British Isles that merely voicing support for an organization dedicated to ending a genocide could land a writer in Belmarsh prison. The cancel culture the right is hysterical about does not come from the left. The left does not control universities, corporations, or states. It comes from right-wing, Christo-fascist xenophobes. The left want to use culture to expand access to experiences of beauty across humanity and to bring more people together and into the fold. The right wants to take away your right to express ideas, love, and dissent as your heart and conscience guide you. I respectfully ask each of you to consider the evidence and to vote for the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you for that incisive speech, Stephen. We now move to the opposition, and opening the case is Professor Douglas Headley. Douglas Headley is a professor in the Faculty of Divinity at Cambridge University. He is co-chair of the Platonism and Neoplatonism section of the American Academy of Religion and past secretary of the British and European Societies for the Philosophy of Religion. He has taught in Europe, India, and the United States. Douglas, you have the ears of the House.
Well, let me start by defining what I mean by right wing. And I'm a Burkean conservative, an anti-contractualist. So I don't see the social contract as a voluntary agreement between individuals creating government. I see society as constituted not only as between those who are living, but between those who are living, those who are dead, and those who are to be born. Rather than a contract, society should be thought of as a trust, where each generation consists of trustees, preserving the legacy of our ancestors and passing it on to future generations. And I think, therefore, that social obligations are not purely matters of rational self-interest. And I'm anti-revolutionary because it's easier to destroy a culture than to build it up. And I'm anti-utopian. I don't believe in the perfectibility of mankind. And this is based on my Christian conviction that human nature is flawed. Politics is often, however, the religion of the godless man. And the zeal of utopian leftists can be or can have appalling consequences. It's no accident that perhaps the greatest horrors of the last century were created by utopian politics, whether you think of the Communist Party of China, the Soviet Union, Ceausescu in Romania, Pol Pot, the list could go on. On the contrary, free speech requires the organic tradition of liberty that we've enjoyed in this country for many centuries. I'd also like to mention another great conservative thinker alongside Burke, the Dutchman, Johan Huizinga, who wrote a great book in 1938 called Homo Ludens, Man the Player. Huizinga was a great Anglophile, and of course it was a book written when the great European powers were all totalitarian, with the exception of France and Britain. It was a defense of the spirit of play, the spirit, as he saw it, of an older conservative Europe as opposed to the repressive regimes of fascism and communism. Like Burke, he admired the spirit of chivalry and wit, and he detested the bureaucratic rigidity of totalitarian Germany or Russia. He was also conscious of the agonistic side of play, from the Greek word agon, contest. Contest and competition is a key part of play, and this often serves to regulate and diffuse violence. And Huizinga admired the emphasis in our parliamentary democracy upon persuasion rather than force. So he applauded the to and fro of Parliament, particularly in that apex of its oratory, sadly gone today. But I wish to reflect upon a particular idea employed by the left that threatens free speech, hate speech, and the idea that words are violence. Hate speech, I suggest, is a highly questionable notion and is properly viewed as a perversion of the English philosopher John Stuart Mill's harm principle. The harm principle, as proposed by John Stuart Mill, claims that people should be at liberty to follow their interests unless causing harm to others. The idea of hate speech is a dangerous modification of Mill's principle that one is at liberty for actions but not to thereby inflict harm to others by redefining harm as extending to the use of words. Now, evidently, the pen can be mightier than the sword, and words can, of course, inflict pain. But the potential for the abuse of this principle, however well-meaning, is evident. And moreover, hatred is part of the human psyche. Our aversions and antipathies are as much a part of our nature as our inclinations and our loves. And this is reinforced by the left through their stress upon claim rights as opposed to negative rights. Freedom of speech is a typical negative right. It's a right to non-interference, rather like the right against theft or violence. But the left habitually insists upon positive or claim rights. This has sometimes been referred to as rights inflation, including rights to non-discrimination or group rights, perhaps protection from Islamophobia or racism. Now, the key problem here is that the left is inclined to legislate morality. There are acts, or rather, we need to distinguish between law and morality. There are acts that are illegal and yet perfectly moral. I would say fox hunting belongs to this category. There are acts that are legal but quite possibly immoral. Euthanasia might be an instance of this. The law is a blunt instrument. And using the law to enforce ethical attitudes is often problematic, sometimes draconian. Combine this unfortunate and dangerous doctrine of hate speech with a highly ambiguous term like Islamophobia, and the results are dismal. Consider the government's recent blasphemy laws. First, take the nature of Islam. It's not like Judaism or Hinduism, an ethnic religion. You're born of Jewish stock, you're born a Hindu, you're certainly not born Islamic in the same sense, because Islamophobia is a set of beliefs. So it's an incoherent notion. We might also note here the bizarre tendency to police language to probe the most innocent and apparently harmless expressions or terms for their sexist, racist, or otherwise alarming implications. This emerges from the damnatio memoriae of notables, tearing down statues, removing paintings, the revision of language and terminology. This is all the cultural revolution of the avant-garde, purging the tongue of inherited evils. And the presiding idea here, and I think it's philosophically false, is that of the human being as the Rousseauian noble savage. Naturally empathetic, egalitarian, it's only through corruption by wicked traditions, reinforcing sexist, racist, and generally xenophobic attitudes that myriad evils abide. And the contemporary university, I put to you, is a good example of the dangers of this left-wing attack on free speech. With the Gramscian long march through the institutions, senior common rooms, and I can tell you this out of experience, are largely inhabited by Guardian-reading progressives. And meanwhile, we have the cancellation of senior academics like David Starkey, Nigel Biggar, or Kathleen Stock. Yet there have been positives. Consider the victory in 2020 in this university in the Senate House when the proposal to limit free speech with respect was defeated in favor of toleration with a vote of 87% in favor to defend unpopular or controversial opinions. The difference between respect and tolerance is decisive for an intellectual community. No one can expect me to respect the schoolboy Marxism of a Michel Foucault or an Edward Said. Yet I accept that there's a Said Prize in the English faculty, even though I consider Said's Orientalism to be a work of a charlatan. And I recognize that Foucault is one of the most influential thinkers in the Western Academy, even if I consider his arguments absurd. Requisite for free expression is the properly agonistic or competitive dimension of debate in a university. Long may it continue.
Thank you, Douglas, for that fine speech. We now move to our first round of floor speeches. Is there anyone willing to speak in proposition of the motion? We shall go over there.
Hi, I'm Sammy. I'm a MPhil historian at St John's. Just firstly, before I start, it's fantastic to be here at Chris's last debate. I think a fantastic motion, and I hope he goes back to having some more rest, although I do highly doubt it upon knowing the man. I feel like we've been having this version of the debate now for years. I've been here a very long time, and it always kind of comes back to the same talking points about woke students, about our censoriousness, and indeed I've sat on that chair and I've had to defend the right to have controversial people and to have that free exchange of views against people who are sometimes censorious on the left. But I feel like the world that we're living in has so fundamentally changed. I'll give you an example. Just today, Suella Braverman wrote a letter to the Vice-Chancellor of St Andrews, outraged at students having the temerity to protest reform speakers at the campus, demanding they be expelled from the university. In fact, people in Cambridge were also being labelled in the same way. In America, the process has been so much more drastic and absolute. It is not simply a matter of people being criticised for their opinions and potentially being slightly alone in that common room. It is people losing their jobs and sometimes being incarcerated. A student was hauled into a white van by American authorities and detained for writing an op-ed by the people who support the conservative transatlantic agenda. We saw professors suspended and fired en masse, civil society purged, and a sense of fear descending as a result of a right-wing ideology that does not and cannot tolerate free dissent, because like all tyrannical ideologies, it would wither away under that light. We are now seeing this being implemented as a much more broad transatlantic program. I notice there are people here who are ardent defenders of freedom of speech. But when it comes to any freedom of speech that inconveniences their political buddies, total, deathly silence. When it comes to the right of minorities to express themselves freely on the public stage without fear of intimidation or violence, deathly silence. And we see that because of the influence of money and because of the powerful transatlantic influence. And I want to just keep this short by ending on an anecdote a little bit closer to here, which is in Cambridge. Many of you will be aware, about 2 years ago, we had Peter Thiel, who was here being interviewed, which I think was the right decision. It was in front of all of us. But we now have a situation where that dissent can no longer be tolerated. He is instead hosted privately by a professor who, rather than engaging in the Cambridge open tradition of debate, decides to handpick his students, whilst they all clap him, whilst he declares that the Antichrist is coming and violence must be rained down upon the left, all while building a surveillance apparatus to build the largest censorship machine that we have decided. And again, we hear silence from those on the free speech camp because they know they have been complicit in the growth of that ideology. Contestation and criticism is the correct use of freedom of speech. Protest is the correct use of freedom of speech. And freedom of speech does not give you freedom from criticism. But what we must defend until it is too late is our desire and our ability to speak freely, without government violence, without ever being bundled into a van as we're seeing in America, and without giving in to the dark Thielite fantasies which are sadly spilling out of the divinity faculty as we speak. So it is imperative to recognize the transatlantic threat. I know you find it funny, but I don't find it particularly funny. You've been giggling all debate. But I think essentially what we need to do now is recognize that, yes, sometimes wokery, as it's called, can be annoying, but there is an existential threat here, and we must vote in favor of this motion to defend our democratic freedoms against the American tech titans. Thank you.
My thanks to the member for his fine speech. Do we have anyone willing to speak in opposition of the motion? Anyone? Opposition? Yeah, down there.
Douglas Page, Magdalen College. This is a highly moralised debate. If you're on the left wing, the odds are you are going to support the proposition. If you're on the right wing, the odds are you naturally support the proposition, the opposition. If you're on the right wing, you naturally support the opposition. I'd like to take a step back and offer a historical perspective. A long time ago, the left wing was the greatest defender of free speech because the authorities in charge were on the right wing, comparatively. They threatened their right to express their views, whether they be anti-racist, anti-misogynistic, and so on. So in the past, it was the case that the right wing was the greatest threat to free expression. But whenever you think this shift happened with Tony Blair, with Clement Attlee, whenever you think we gained a left-wing government, it became the case that, in fact, the left wing, who are now in authority, they posed the greatest threat. You can't pose a threat unless you've got the power. It doesn't matter what your virtue signalling is. It doesn't matter what you're saying. It matters what you can do. And we have a left-wing British government, and it's the British government that's the greatest threat to freedom of speech, and therefore it's the left wing that's the greatest threat to freedom of speech. Thank you.
My thanks to the member for his fine speech. And finally, do we have anybody willing to speak in abstention of the motion? We shall go down there.
Hello, Olivia, Christ College. No one in the debate has answered the question so far. What is freedom of speech? Both sides of the House have given me many plausible threats to freedom of speech. They've said, freedom of speech is a threat, this is a really bad thing. I would like to know from the proposition why the right wing specifically is a big threat to freedom of speech rather than just people clamping down on free speech, because if that was the answer to the debate, there's no point in any of us being here. And from the opposition, why is it specifically not the right wing as opposed to a combination of other things that is the threat to freedom of speech? Please debate the motion, people in the debate.
My thanks to the member for her incisive speech. We now return to our paper speakers, and our next speaker is someone who needs no introduction, Mr. Christopher Lorde. Christopher Lorde is a third-year undergraduate at Christ College, reading human, social, and political sciences, specialising in sociology. He is also the outgoing president of the Cambridge Union, and both he and his director of studies look forward to his eventual reunion with his degree work. You may know him from just about any and every society in Cambridge. Chris, for the last time, you have the ears of the House.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's been a moment since I've been up here, so forgive me if I'm a little bit rusty. But it is a true pleasure to be here debating the motion this evening. This time 3 years ago, I didn't live in Cambridge. I lived near this place some of you may have heard of called Dallas, Texas, where I watched videos of the Cambridge Union, never knowing that I would stand here today, let alone sit on that chair, and let alone have the master key, the front door key, and the alarm system to the building. But when I lived there, I made it to Cambridge, and I made it to the Cambridge Union via reading books that are now banned in my high school, through organizations that are now banned from meeting in my high school, through so many things that are not available to the generations who are coming after me, including my younger brother, who jet lag has falling asleep on the chair right there. And I'm not talking about the Antifas of the world. I'm talking about the Black Student Union and Gay Club, which are now banned from meeting in the state of Texas. I mean, it's ridiculous that we are even standing up here and debating the motion, insisting that, you know, people being mean in a senior common room is equivalent to the state denying the senior common room the right to exist. But I'm going to do it anyways. Now, in my city of Dallas, in the state of Texas, the city in which I grew up, prosecutors very recently charged one artist in connection to a protest he didn't attend. They said that he was indicted for having Antifa materials, carrying zines and pamphlets from his home to his wife, and that somehow this was some sort of indication of terrorist activity simply because of the content of the magazines. I mean, it's very, very clear to me that there is a severe, severe asymmetry between what the opposition is planning to argue here tonight. The insistence that cancel culture and wokeness is today's greatest threat to free expression, and the reality on the ground. It is no longer a blueprint for censorship that is occurring at the highest institutions in the US and the UK. It is simply flat-out censorship. I am not asking you tonight to consider left-wing ideas worth debating. I am not asking you tonight to consider left-wing ideas worth listening to, but I am asking you tonight to recognize that people should have the right to say these ideas, that people should be able to say things which you disagree with, that you should be able to call Edward Said a charlatan, or insist that Foucault is schoolboy Marxism, without having the arm of the state clamp down upon you and disappear you into a camp for writing an op-ed doing so. Professor Headley talks about the perversion of Mill's words, the idea that speech in and of itself can be harmful, and insists that it is the left wing that is the only force, or the prominent force, that is doing so. I think that's just plainly untrue. It was in Texas, where Greg Abbott used anti-Semitism to curb down on pro-Palestine protests, insisting that hate, aka anti-war protest, had no space on Texas campuses. It's here in the UK that the Conservatives and now the Labour Party, carrying out the remainder of their manifesto, have continuously cracked down on the right to protest. And it's why I want to talk about what Douglas said briefly, because he talked about, this idea that the current Labour government in power is actually the left posing the greatest threat to free expression. I don't know if I'd call the Labour Party left-wing anymore, but also I would say that Labour carrying out the Tory manifesto, Labour continuing to enact laws that were introduced by the Conservatives, is not the left wing posing a threat to free expression. It's the left wing capitulating to right-wing insistence that protest is dangerous and that protest needs to be suppressed by any means necessary. The Human Rights Watch is warning that our laws regarding protest are going downhill every single day. It was my first debate in this chamber, which some of the people in this room might remember, where I insisted that the government is too harsh on protest, and another government later, it has only gotten worse. Police powers continue to expand. Enormous parts of our fundamental rights continue to be criminalized. And our laws on protest are becoming more and more analogous to countries like Russia, countries in which human rights continue to be disappearing at alarming rates just as individuals are. And this isn't a hypothetical anymore. 2 years ago and a bit, when I stood here in front of this chamber, it was hypotheticals. We were talking about, the potential for the laws that are being enacted regarding protest to curb our essential rights. That's no longer a possibility, that is reality. And looking at the plans of the right wing, not just the Conservatives, but Reform UK as well, it's only going to get worse. Let's take a look at Reform UK's Operation Restoring Justice, their equivalent of Project 2025. And their attempts to create their own immigrations and customs enforcement, which I remind you is now seemingly illegal to protest in the United States. In Operation Restoring Justice, Reform UK insists that we need to disapply the Refugee Convention, disapply the UN Convention Against Torture, and disapply the Council of Europe's Anti-Trafficking Convention. This is a blatant assault on human rights. And the government, seemingly, doesn't want you to be able to protest it. Because now, under the laws that continue to be introduced to draw back on rights to protest, public assemblies can be made illegal if they are too noisy, if they cause serious unease. Individuals, members of the public, can be arrested for carrying items like cable ties, bike locks, glue. I mean, if you're a student here at Cambridge, I can guarantee you that at least one of you has at least one of those things in your bag right now. And I regret to inform you, but this entire chamber is under arrest for biking in the city of Cambridge. I mean, do you hear how ridiculous that sounds? And yet it's reality. Our right to protest, our right for free speech and free expression is fundamentally being trampled on. And so to address Olivia's point today, let's look at what free speech should be. Because it should be the right to protest. It should be the right to use dissent. It should be the right to express oneself freely. If I stand up and I say that Kathleen Stock's essentialism is not worth listening to, I have the right to do so. If I go out there and I protest the Cambridge Union hosting someone that I dislike, I have the right to do so. To do so is not a fundamental curbing of free speech rights. To protest someone's invitation to speak is not a fundamental reversion of free speech rights. In fact, it is using one's free speech rights, one's right to assembly, one's right to protest. We can stand up here all day and talk about how cancel culture is the greatest threat to free expression, how people saying that they don't like your words is oh so horrible and wah 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 and blah blah. But at the end of the day, that is free expression. If I stand up here and I say what you've said is ridiculous, I am not curbing your free speech rights by doing so. I am not curbing your free speech rights by saying I don't think this person should have an uncritical platform. It might be mean, it might not be great, it might not be nice. But there's a huge difference between that and the government clamping down on what you can say and where you can say it. I will say, I am a proud Guardian reading progressive. And maybe my views on what free speech are differ slightly from what others may be. But at the end of the day, that fundamental right to protest, the ability to stand in a chamber and debate motions like this, the ability for us to engage with one another, for me to say that your ideas are, and forgive me for my language, bullshit, and for you to say the same about my ideas being bullshit, and to use that in whatever words you may choose to do so, is a fundamental right of every citizen in this country. Or at least it should be. But here, in the UK, in the US, and across the globe, we are watching a concerted effort to take those rights back. Free expression is not just a matter of being able to say what you want to say. It is not just a matter of being able to stand up and protest where you choose to protest. But it is also the ability to be who you are without fear of government repression. It should be the ability to choose how you present yourself gender-wise without the state of Kansas taking away your ID or the state of Texas demanding that you be put on a list. There is a global assault against trans individuals and trans rights, not just in the UK, as Professor Stephen Thrasher mentioned, but also in the US, and that is a fundamental assault on free expression, free rights, and free liberty. At every level, whether it be the right to assembly, the right to protest, the right to say what needs to be said, or the right to dissent, the right wing has become today's greatest threat to free expression. It is no longer the hypotheticals of this law can do this and this law can do that. But it is individuals being dragged into white unmarked vans by people wearing black masks and balaclavas for saying the wrong things in an op-ed. It is people being disappeared by states and the United States for having the wrong opinions, for transporting magazines that say the wrong thing, for daring to have a book that's a little bit controversial. At the end of the day, I could stand up here for hours and hours talking about how cancel culture might not be the nicest thing ever. But we're in a real crisis. And that crisis is no longer people saying hurty words or saying that your hurty words shouldn't be heard. But it is a fundamental and structural assault on the right and liberties that we all should be entitled to. And for that reason, I urge you all to pass this motion.
My thanks to Chris for that impassioned and incisive speech, bringing a wonderful presidency to a close. Thank you. We now move to our second opposition speaker, the Right Honourable Lord Young of Acton. Toby Young is the General Secretary of the Free Speech Union, a non-partisan mass membership public interest body that stands up for the speech and rights of its members and campaigns for free speech more widely. In 2011, he co-founded the West London Free School, the first free school to sign a funding agreement with the British government, and is co-founder of Knowledge Schools Trust, a multi-academy trust where he served as chairman of the board of trustees and later CEO. He is also the editor-in-chief of The Daily Skeptic, a news publishing website that he founded in 2020. He won the Contrarian Prize in 2021 and was made a Conservative peer in 2024. Toby, you have the ears of the House.
Thank you. I just thought I'd begin by correcting some of the things that the previous speakers have said. Very impassioned, very good speech, if I may say, the first floor speech of the night. But the implication, I think, was that the Free Speech Union does not defend the rights of people whom I disagree with. And that's not true. We genuinely are a non-partisan organisation. We've currently got a case of a Palestine Action protester who is being prosecuted for holding up a sign saying, I support Palestine Action. And more generally, of the 5,600 cases that we've been involved in since 2020, when I set it up, about 40% of them are coded sex and gender in our Salesforce case database, and they are overwhelmingly women who've got into trouble for defending single-sex spaces, for saying they don't want to share changing rooms, women's lavatories with biological men. And even though I know those women in some people's eyes are coded right-wing, they self-identify overwhelmingly as centre-left. So it's simply not true to say that the Free Speech Union only defends people on the right or who I happen to agree with. Professor Thrasher, excellent speech, but you did focus a little bit on the US, I felt, as did our outgoing president. And if we're going to globalise this, well, I see your US and raise you North Korea, China, and Cuba. I think the evidence that in far left countries, the threat to free speech is far, far greater than it is in America at present, I think is irrefutable. So if we're going to broaden our canvas to include the whole of the world, I don't think you can plausibly claim that the right is a greater threat to free expression than the left. Several examples from the UK, getting closer to home. I didn't recognise Professor Thrasher's characterisation of the UK as a hotbed of right-wing oppression. Last night in the House of Lords, a majority of the members voted in support of an amendment to decriminalise abortion up to the moment of birth. You might think, well, that's because lots of left-of-centre peers voted for it, and they did. But if the right in the House of Lords were committed to defeating this amendment, they did a pretty poor job of it, because there are something like, well, there are 278 Tory peers in the House of Lords, and fewer than 100 of them actually voted against decriminalising abortion up to the moment of birth. So I don't think you can plausibly claim that even the right is waging a war in this country on women's reproductive rights. Christopher, you mentioned various assaults on the right to protest, and you're right to do so, but that's coming as much from the left as it is from the right. There's a bill currently going through the parliamentary sausage machine called the Crime and Policing Bill, and it includes a number of new offences that people can be prosecuted for committing at protests, such as letting off fireworks, climbing on historic monuments. It gives the police powers to insist people remove face coverings, and it expands police powers in other respects too. That's a Labour bill, not a Conservative bill, so I don't think you can plausibly claim that the assault on the right to protest is evidence of the right being a greater threat to freedom of expression than the left. I think I did have various examples, survey data, showing that the left is a greater threat to free expression than the right. I won't go through them all. One I thought was particularly telling was one assembled by an organisation called Freedom in the Arts, which stands up for freedom of expression in the arts in the UK. And in a recent survey conducted last year, they discovered that 78% of people who work in the arts, 78%, say that they wouldn't dare express a right of centre opinion for fear of losing their jobs. That's how oppressive the left-wing dominance of the arts sector is. So I don't think you can plausibly claim that in the arts the right poses a greater threat to free expression than the left. I wanted to give some examples from Cambridge, bringing it all a lot closer to home. I just wanted to give 4 examples of Cambridge academics who'd been cancelled. They're all right of centre, not left of centre, though they were cancelled by people on the left. And I challenge those on the other side in this debate to give a single example of a left of centre academic at Cambridge who's been cancelled by a right-wing mob. I'd be impressed if you can give me one, but I'm going to give you 4 people on the right who've been cancelled by people on the left. My first example is Dr. Noah Carl. In 2019, an open letter was signed by 1,400 academics and students demanding that St Edmund's College sack Dr. Noah Carl, a young research scholar, accusing him of ethically suspect work that amounted to racist pseudoscience. So what was Noah Carl's sin? It was to have published a paper, a well-researched paper, in which he discovered that hostility amongst the British public to different immigrant groups correlated with the propensity of members of those groups to commit crimes, particularly violent crimes. So he discovered, in the course of doing this research, that Turkish, Romanian and Nigerian immigrants were among the least popular with the British public, and they're also among the most likely to commit violent crimes, whereas the most popular groups with the British public, Canadians and Australians, were amongst the least likely to commit violent crimes. And for producing this paper, he was condemned as a racist pseudoscientist. St Edmund's College held 2 inquiries, the first of which was conducted by a retired senior judge, and it completely exonerated him, while a second internal investigation concluded his work fell below acceptable academic standards and said his position was therefore untenable and forced him out. And the master of St Edmund's College said, and I quote, "I apologise unreservedly for the hurt and offence felt by all members of college." So that was the fate of Dr. Noah Carl, cancelled by 1,400 people who didn't like his conclusions and accused him of pseudoscience, not criticising any of his methodology, not disputing his findings, but just saying, because you made these findings, you are a racist and you have no place at Cambridge. Second example, Dr. Jordan Peterson, who was offered a visiting fellowship by Professor Headley, I understand, in late 2018. And 3 months later, after he'd accepted this invitation, it was rescinded. And Jordan Peterson's sin was to have been photographed at one of his public speaking events with his arm around a man wearing a T-shirt saying, "I'm a proud Islamophobe." Now, I don't know how many of you have been to one of Dr. Peterson's speaking events, but people pay to have selfies taken with him. He takes about 1 selfie every 15 seconds at the conclusion of these events. He doesn't inspect what's on the T-shirts of people he's standing next to. Yes, sure.
Dr. Peterson has one of the largest platforms in the entire world. Don't you recognise that there is a substantive difference between what we were talking about, which is extreme violence, often led by the state, by the right wing, and somebody not getting a job? Don't you understand that those two things are fundamentally different in level of threat?
Well, we're talking about who poses the greatest threat to free expression. And if a group of left-of-centre academics petition the divinity faculty and the university to cancel someone whose views, whose right-of-centre views they disapprove of, that seems to me an instance of the right, not the left, posing a threat to free expression. Sure, yeah.
So you would probably call me left-wing. I was a professor in the United States, and because I stood with my students protesting against Palestine, I was removed from the classroom. I was denied tenure, and I have not been able to work in any other capacity in American academia.
Well, I wouldn't dispute that it sounds like your right to freedom of expression has been breached, and it may be that it was breached by people on the right, not the left. But I think, as I said earlier, there are many more examples of people losing their right to free expression in other parts of the world. So I don't think just America's example alone is sufficient to win the argument in your favour. Anyway, we know what happened to Dr. Peterson. He was cancelled, wasn't allowed to come and give a series of lectures here. I got some other examples too. There was Dr. Nathan Koffner, similar story to... Sure, I've only got a minute left, but sure.
Very quick. Nathan Koppner's findings and methodology were widely disputed, and it was the failings of that methodology that led many people alongside the findings to argue for his removal. It wasn't just simply people saying, we don't like you, get out.
Well, the philosophy faculty conducted an extensive investigation, looked at the blog post, which was the contentious blog post. He was accused of writing, again, a racist, pseudo-scientific blog post. But it was examined rigorously by the philosophy faculty, and they said it fell within the acceptable bounds of academic freedom and freedom of expression. But Emmanuel College nevertheless decided to sack him as an honorary fellow. Sure, yeah.
Nathan Koffner said that if you were to establish a pure meritocracy, there would be no black professors at Harvard. He said that we should accept that talents and intelligence aren't equally distributed between races. These aren't standard academic reasonable points to hold. These are just pure, plain and simple racism. He accepts as much himself. He called himself a race realist. This is just accepted racism. This is not some kind of like academic disagreement
but you may well regard his views as racist, but surely the appropriate way to engage with someone like Dr. Koffner is to argue with him, to dispute the evidence he amasses in support of his various claims. If you think they're ridiculous, that they're pseudo-scientific, that no evidence could possibly substantiate them, then engage with him, debate him in a public forum like this. I'm sure he'd be happy to do it. That's surely the way to engage with ideas you deeply disapprove of, even ideas you think of as potentially dangerous. Not to say, sorry, you're not deserving of being listened to, no platform, cancelled, get out of my sight. That's not the appropriate way to respond to challenging, provocative ideas that you may intensely dislike. And it's an example, I think, of the intolerance of the left, and just illustrates my general point. I was going to go on to talk about Dr. Starkey. Dr. Starkey, he lost his visiting professorship at Fitzwilliam College here after making some intemperate remarks in a podcast, which he very quickly apologized for, whereas Priya Gopal, at almost exactly the same time, tweeted, "White lives don't matter." This was in 2020 at the height of the Black Lives Matter imbroglio. She tweeted, "White lives don't matter as white lives," and the university immediately defended her right to free speech, said nothing she'd said was unlawful, it was perfectly within the bounds of acceptable free expression, quite unlike Dr. Starkey, who, as a result of what he said, which was really no worse than that, ended up losing 9 positions, lost a book deal, academic prizes, taken back, and lost his visiting fellowship at Fitzwilliam. These are all examples of the intolerance of the left posing a far greater threat to free expression than the right. The example I was going to conclude with, if you'll give me the liberty to do so, was the Cambridge University Women's Society, and I think that is a positive story. It's a positive story because there were various efforts to cancel that society, to persuade the university and the Students' Union not to accredit them. They were called fascists, they were denounced as terrorists, I think, but nevertheless, the Students' Union and the university have officially recognised them. That society now exists. So I think there is some reason for hope that the left, even at Cambridge, are becoming a little more tolerant, are willing to engage, to listen, to debate, and not just cancel and no platform. And I just wanted to end by saying that the Free Speech Union, through its McTaggart programme, has helped to fund the Cambridge University Women's Society. And if anyone is interested in applying for funding from the Free Speech Union for their society, if it has a kind of free speech dimension, a debating dimension, then please do apply to us for a McTaggart programme grant, whether you're on the left or the right. And you can do that by applying to grant applications at freespeechunion.org. And I hope to hear from some of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby, for that fine speech. We now return to our second round of floor speeches. I should probably state that the floor prize speech this evening is a £50 voucher at our in-house bar and restaurant, The Orator. So do we have anyone who's looking to make a speech in proposition of the motion? We will go to the front there. Please state your name and college for record.
Thank you, Farron Smith, Selwyn College. I should start by thanking Chris. Chris, you've been the most amazing president throughout my entire time at the Cambridge Union. You've been one of my closest friends. You've been an incredible mentor. I truly cannot imagine this place without you. I don't know how I'm going to manage through the rest of the second half of my degree without you in this building, because truly, this would not be the place it has been without you in this building. Now, we've naturally heard quite a lot about America. I mean, with two proposition speakers resident in the country, it's quite natural. And I think that's entirely fair, because I traveled to America over the summer. I spent my flight from London to New York. I did not sleep. I did not watch films. I didn't read my book. I didn't do any of the academic reading that I'd promised my DOS that I would do on the flight. Instead, I spent most of that flight going through my phone, deleting group chats, leaving group chats, deleting hundreds, if not thousands of messages, including with you, Chris, that I knew that if I had been stopped at that border and if my phone had been checked, would not allow me into that country. I was deeply afraid when applying for that ESTA. I flew to the US, in fact, the day after Charlie Kirk got shot. And it was very much a time of extreme tension in that country and in the entire world. But I also want to talk about the case for freedom of speech on this side of the Atlantic. And particularly, I want to talk about the fact that freedom of speech is not an unconditional right. And when we talk about freedom of speech, we should be talking about freedom of speech as defined by the state. And, well, freedom of expression. Freedom of expression is the motion. Freedom of expression is something that should be defined by the state, guaranteed to its citizens. It is not a matter of, someone told me I couldn't say this thing, so now I can't say it. It's not the fact of the woke left mob is cancelling me and now I can't have my job. Because the fact of the matter is that this is a right defined by the state under the Human Rights Act and the European Convention on Human Rights. And this is something that I believe the state has a right to create a safe space for all to speak. And a lot of the speech that we see coming from the right is the kind of speech that does not create a safe space for voices to be heard. Because if you walk into a space and you know that someone in that space does not believe in your right to exist as a person, in your right to express yourself as a person, if I walk into a space and I know that someone there is going to call me a fag, then I do not want to be in that space. That is not a safe space for me to be in, and the state, I believe, has a right to condemn hate speech, to say this person is a racist, this person is putting out, yes, it is pseudo-scientific racism. This is not an academic debate. This is a fact that the state must create a safe space for people to be able to express themselves freely and safely in our society. At the moment, is that happening? No. Why is that happening? Because we have significant forces on the right pressing down on us. We have forces on the right, pressure groups, Reform, the remnants of UKIP, whoever it may be, because the fact of the matter is, yes, we have a left-wing government in this country. Yeah, sure. I believe that the government should... we have hate speech laws in this country for a reason. So should all... Like I said, freedom of expression is not an absolute right. Hate speech is still a crime. Sure. I mean, I don't have to kind of come up with some kind of moral position. This is in the UN Declaration of Human Rights, this is in the ESHR, the right to life, and other such rights are absolute rights and cannot be controlled by the state at all.
Can you bring your speech to a close, please?
Thank you very much. There are pressure groups on the right that are pressing on the government to restrict the right to freedom of expression in our society. This is a great problem, and the major threat, the major pressure on the government to restrict these rights comes from the right, and I endorse you all to vote for the proposition. Thank you very much.
My thanks to the member for his fine speech. Do we have anyone willing to make a floor speech in opposition of the motion? We shall go over there. Please state your name and college for the record.
I'm Yumi McCarthy from Peterhouse. So I think both sides have convincingly argued to us that they are trying to restrict freedom of speech. We can see on the right, they might be trying to restrict your freedom of protest, but on the left, they might be trying to create laws on hate speech. What we've seen is not that either side is a bigger threat, it's that both sides are threatening our freedom of speech. There will always be oppressive governments, but the point is, our biggest weapon against this is our ability to stand up to this, to share true information and not the information the media wants us to see. This is why I think the most useful tool for freedom of speech is social media and the media in general. And that, yes? Yes, I do see that as an argument, but I think the more important point here is the algorithm itself is the bigger threat. Because the point is, having social media where everyone can have their voice heard is a way to achieve freedom of speech. The reason that we're having this threatened is because certain parties are trying to restrict what can be seen. I think an example of this is by algorithms where they favor things that are controversial. So for example, the Charlie Kirks of the world are being pushed, but equally controversial left-wing speakers are pushed as well, as this is what is rewarded within the algorithm. Another example is social medias that create echo chambers on the left and the right. How is Twitter both too right for the left wing and too left for the right wing? So they create their own with Blue Sky for the left wing and having Truth Social for the right wing. So I think really what we need to think about is social media being threatened. An example of this is Grok, for example. I appreciate the point that the right wing are utilizing it right now. But as we can see, the left wing have their own ideas about what freedom of speech should entail. And they might, for example, promote hate speech laws within social media. So right now, I can appreciate that the right wing are the biggest speech, but having a social media where we can say everything freely is so important against freedom of speech. And I think once the left wing are in power, we might see that curtailed by things like hate speech laws. So I think the greatest threat to freedom of speech is what happens with social media from now on. And while it might be in the hands of the right wing right now, that might not always be true. So we need to protect this importance of having an algorithm that does not favor the most controversial, and does not favor those who are in power, but allows everyone to speak equally. Thank you.
My thanks to the member for her fine speech. And to round off our floor speeches this evening, do we have anyone willing to make a floor speech in abstention? We shall go there.
Oliver Dallas, Magdalen College. I think that the last speaker we heard, the floor speaker, made an interesting point that effectively free speech is under attack from all sides of the aisle. But I think, moreover, this motion condemns the right as a monolithic entity of oppression of free speech. And I think the proposition has convinced us quite soundly that, for instance, ICE is definitely an attack on free speech. But I think the opposition have also convinced us that some aspects of the left wing are also suppressing free speech. And so I think in this motion, if we both vote yes or no, we are condemning ourselves to believing that the right is a monolithic entity. We are suppressing our own free speech. And I think that by abstaining, just wait a second, sorry. I think by abstaining, you're better going to be able to distinguish. Some people on the right are fine, some people are not.
I mean, the motion is asking what the greater threat is. It's not saying this House believes the right wing is the only threat to free speech, but the greatest one. Can you not weigh the difference between some people think I shouldn't have a job and the government has disappeared me into a white van?
Yeah. I do think that, but in order to weigh a difference, right, you need to be actually weighing two different things. I think what you have is you have heterogeneous groups on both sides, and therefore to subsume the whole of the right, even if it is how can I put this nicely? You're grouping everyone together in a way that just doesn't make sense because they're heterogeneous. And I appreciate if you want to weigh everything up, you can. But if you make a massive average, you're not actually saying very much. What you need to do instead is pick out what aspects are harmful on both sides. How can we actually, if you actually want to improve free speech, rather than villainizing an entity, because that is not actually how we have speech, that's not how we have debate. We need to appreciate people are different. People can have similar views, but also have very different ones at the same time. Yeah. Yeah, but I think, exactly as you say, it's emerging. It's not fully present. It's not entire. You're just lumping a whole bunch of people into one entity in a way that I think is not conducive to your expression, to your debate, and to your free speech. Thank you very much.
My thanks to the member for his informed speech. We now move back to our final round of paper speakers. And closing the case for the proposition this evening is Manisha Talreja. Manisha is a second-year undergraduate student reading human, social, and political sciences at Selwyn College and won the right to speak through open audition. Manisha, you have the ears of the House.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Manisha Talreja, and the last time I stood in this chamber was when I heard Matthew Goodwin speak. Currently, 8 weeks ago, the Reform star boy, the man destined to be the right-wing flag bearer in the Northern England. Oh, sorry. Hello, can you hear me now? Sorry. The last time I stood up in this chamber was when I heard Matthew Goodwin speak. I didn't plan a speech then. Honestly, I heard him and I got angry. I got angry by what reform the right wing in this new right rhetoric brings us. He was supposed to be the flag bearer of reform, bringing it to Northern England. Weeks later, he lost the by-election. And I felt, I admit, particular pleasure from that. Not because I like seeing people fail, but because I know what his politics result in. I know the politics that result from this new right coming into power means for all of us. And I'm here to tell you that a movement that screams about free expression from every platform they can find, that the moment that they come close to that power, it abandons all principles related to that and reveals exactly what it thinks of free speech. I want to ask in this room, in 2016, who is it that is actually suffocating that oxygen that drives free expression? Is it the woke left? Is it the annoying student who tells you, I think we should be all vegan? Or is it government banning books? Is it the state telling you that if you do not behave, we will deport you? Is it state budgets being used to silence those? And is it courts now being used to protect the executive branch? The dominant academic model now says that authoritarian governments don't just come in like this. There's no coups happening. What happens slowly, they'll get into power, they'll win elections, and they'll use state power to silence dissent and dismantle civil society. We can see this happening with Viktor Orban in Hungary. When he didn't immediately shut down the press, he won a supermajority, rewrote the constitution, and appoint loyalists to the regulatory body, and created economic conditions where independent media now cannot survive in Hungary. 80% of media now in Hungary is Fidesz aligned. What does that show for free expression that the right now so clearly says they're the bearers of? I also bring forward the chilling effect. Yes?
How much of the press in China is independent?
Not much, but I'm here to talk about the right's threat, not the left. I'm not here to defend the left. I also bring forward the chilling effect is what happens when the threat of punishment causes self-censorship at scale. Direct censorship leaves effects. Chilling effects are invisible. 9 major law firms in the US promised $1 billion in pro bono legal work to the Trump administration. This is the law that we're talking about, legal, impartial. These law firms had to do this. Why? Because they were scared of the retaliation. Do you know how scary it is now that we live in a society where the people bearing us, this impartial court, are scared of the executive branch? And we talked a lot about cancel culture today. As the right deploys a phrase, something real. I'm not denying that. Social pressure, public accountability, and professional consequences for the things people have said. Like a lot of the professors you said. These things happen, and sometimes they're unjust. I'm not saying they're not. But here's what cancel culture cannot do. It cannot deport you for your political views. It cannot, as the Trump administration has, and detain students for pro-Palestinian speech, serving as reminders exactly what the McCarthy era was as well. It cannot ban 10,000 of books from states and do censorship laws where 6,800 instances were recorded from 2023 to 2024 of book bans. It cannot bar press agencies for coming in White House briefings because they don't agree with them anymore about when they changed a name of like the Gulf of Mexico. No. Viktor Orban also expelled the Central European University because its curriculum didn't suit his ideological interests. The comparison the opposition wants you to make is between a student protest, uncomfortable, sometimes unjust, but always recoverable. One is a social problem and the other is a structural threat to democracy itself. Free expression depends on three conditions: the formal legal right not to be prosecuted, the material conditions to speak and be heard, and the freedom from chilling effect. A campus protest, I will admit, can damage the second condition in an isolated incident, but a government that extracts $15 million settlements from broadcasters attacks all three simultaneously, formally through litigation, materially by making journalism existentially expensive, and psychologically by telling every editor in the country that if you do not write what we deem right, your career is over. And now for the most important argument. The right wing has simply not threatened free expression. It has claimed ownership of it while dismantling its conditions. Nigel Farage and Donald Trump present themselves as free speech absolutes. But Farage himself proposed stripping migrants and non-residents of free speech protection entirely. Trump has pursued legal actions against everyone that has disagreed with him: journalists, novelists, broadcasters, former staffers. FCC Chairman Brendan Carr has explicitly stated his intentions to punish tech companies that do not promote right-wing viewpoints to his personal satisfaction. That is not free speech. That is compelled ideological conformity dashed in libertarian language. This tells us this: when right-wing governments talk about free speech, what they mean is our speech, free from our concepts. Your speech, if it threatens our hegemony, is subject to deportation, defunding, and litigation. You brought up the arts sector. I'm not saying that the arts is not majority left-wing, but would the arts even exist if the right came to the power and they were making art? Yes, I'm sure it's uncomfortable if you're like in the art industry and you have right-wing viewpoints, but would you even be allowed? Would you even have an arts industry if this defunding came up? Yeah.
Please keep your eyes concise.
Yeah, so when you say it's not pro, I'm saying don't look at just the states, look at what it's doing for the other countries and what it's doing for Iran.
I think that's very complicated. As someone who actually used to live in the Middle East and has someone who was raised in a country with Western intervention, I can very much say that when a Western country intervenes in your country to free you, it doesn't really end that well. I'm not sure how this is going to end well. I don't know how it is. But I will say...
No back and forth. No.
But I will say that talking about... You have to really be completely lacking in nuance if you think Trump went to Iran to free girls, the same way that Bush went to Iraq to free women, or like... My best friend, actually, the one who I called before this debate, is an Irani woman. When this happens, the first thing I did, I called her family, and I asked her, was anyone hurt? Yeah, and I completely understand that, but this is a very complicated experience, and it's very nuanced, and to say that Trump is coming in and freeing all of the Iranis, even you know it's not as simple as that. I would also like to bring up the fact that, And Lord Young himself, in his 20-25 minutes oration, admitted as much. He said he was proudly sympathetic to Trump's project, but nervous about how ambiguous they could be when it comes to freedom of expression. He acknowledged that using the machinery of government to silence political enemies, in his own words, is a hallmark of an authoritarian regime. He said that about a movement that he supports. I would like him to explain at what points his nervousness becomes a principle, and on how much does he charge to sell these principles to the right for. Because if you also want to know what a hallmark looks like in practice, I give you Charlie Kirk, someone that was actually here, and we have a complicated relation with at the Union. But Kirk was the right's greatest free speech warrior. He built his career in claiming the left was cancels, silences, and suppresses. He was shot and killed in September 2025, a genuine tragedy. I'm not denying that. And then his movement showed exactly what it had always been. The Vice President of the United States told them, call them out, call their employer. The federal government revoked visa for satirical posts. These are the poster child for free speech? When you revoke people's visa because they put a meme on their Instagram? 600 Americans lost their jobs in that. You talked about 3 professors. I talk about 600 normal, everyday people who did nothing. Just put a Facebook post on, and they lost their job. One faculty member was fired for sharing a Newsweek headline quoting Kirk himself. He was punished for quoting the man they were mourning. The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, which has spent years fighting progressive cancel culture, said what this was, right-wing cancel culture. This is not a coincidence, and this should not surprise us. The pattern is old. McCarthyism was right-wing. The Sedition Acts used to destroy American labor. Press were backed by conservative government. Mussolini ran Hitler's columns in his newspaper. The colonial press censorship was the one that silenced independent movements in Africa and Asia because it benefited imperialist conservative powers. The connection between the right-wing project and the suppression of inconvenient speech is not accidental, it's structural. Conservatism at its core defends existing hierarchies, and those hierarchies are threatened by free speech. The free press, the free university, these institutions generate challenges to these power, and concentrated power, when it turns authoritarian, goes for them first. What is new today is the internationalization of the project, the sophistication of the toolkit, the use of law itself, using regulators themselves and the media to make their lives completely, having no free speech for anyone else but themselves. This is a brilliant and cynical move. By carrying the mantle of free speech in one hand and dismantling the conditions for another. Free speech does not die in a single dramatic motion. It dies the way that Orban killed it in Hungary. Gradually, bureaucratically, always with a plausible excuse, and always wrapped in the language, in the very freedom being extinguished. We are watching the process at scale today. The right wing did not abandon its free speech principle after Charlie Kirk. It revealed that it never had them in the first place. The House must vote for the proposition today. Thank you.
Thank you, Manisha, for that fine speech. We now move to our final opposition speaker this evening, Professor Eric Heinzer. Eric is a professor of law at Queen Mary University, London. He's written books like Coming Clean, The Rise of Critical Theory and the Future of the Left, The Most Human Rights, Why Free Speech is Everything, and Hate Speech and Democratic Citizenship. He was the General Rapporteur on the criminalization of hate speech of the International Academy of Comparative Law from 2021 to 2023. Eric, you have the ears of the House.
Thank you very much to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and of course to my hosts. A very quick lesson in logic, please. You would learn this hopefully just about your first week in a logic class. The opposite of A is not B or C or D. The opposite of A is not A. The opposite of the motion proposing that the right wing poses the greatest danger to free speech is not that the left wing poses the greatest danger, and I have no intention of arguing that. It's simply that it's not the right wing. In other words, it might be the right wing and 5 other political directions. That's just logic. And that's what I'm going to argue. And in fact, I'll be honest that my heart is really sunk this evening at the superficiality of it. So it must be either the right or the left. And I've been slightly encouraged by one or two exceptional remarks, realizing that, that's just crazy. That's quite an artificial distinction. Example, people have rightly mentioned Donald Trump's hideous crackdowns on speech, so I won't go through them again. I think you all know them, right? Against the media, against law firms, and so forth. Now, consider this. The United States Supreme Court, over decades, for 50 years more or less, has promulgated the most protective law of free speech. So how do these fit together? How can you have a legal regime which is most protective in the world of free speech, and yet a president who can silence people right and left? And it's the oldest political lesson in the book. You can have the greatest democracy on paper. You only really have democracy when institutions are fully committed to it, which Trump's regime obviously is not. And there are many examples in the world of democracies on paper. Someone mentioned China. Looks very good on paper, in fact. North Korea looks great on paper. Read their constitution. It doesn't matter what's on paper. What matters is whether institutions are generally committed to the panoply of constitutionally democratic values, including free speech. And so this is not a question of is it the left or is it the right? It's a question of who puts themselves against, who essentially makes themselves an enemy of constitutional democracy. And again, please, after my little lesson in logic, let's do a little lesson in history. History did not begin 10 years ago. Let's extend our timeline to a century or 2 centuries, and we see from the far right and from the far left and from religious fundamentalisms, from various places on the political spectrum, there have been terrible dangers, risks to free speech, and none of them have gone. They're all still here with us. And so it is, and so I oppose the motion that it's the far right, not because I disagree with it. I agree with every point that was made, and I agree with every point that was made about the left. Therefore, it's not about right or left. Therefore, the motion must fail. Because it's not about right or left, it's about people who fundamentally seek to undermine constitutional democracy. And it has always happened from various points on the spectrum, at the far left, at the far right, from religious fundamentalisms, and so forth. Now, but you might be saying, well, yeah, okay, yeah, history, 100 years, 200 years. We just care about now. We just care about the present. Always a bad move, by the way. But never mind, never mind. Let's just take that as a postulate, that we're just going to care about our little immediate world, our decade, and not extend to a genuinely historically informed analysis. Even then, I'm surprised that this example, which has been the most salient, has not yet come up. Let me tell you my views on trans rights. I think that the people who defend the biological paradigm have not made their case. I have been more persuaded by the social constructionist argument, that gender is fundamentally a social construct. I've read all of the arguments by the people taking the biological paradigm, and I think that they have not satisfactorily accounted for the phenomenon of gender and sexuality in human civilization, in human history. It does not, therefore, follow that anyone is doing a favor for trans people by banishing people who want to question this. And so it is trans people and their friends who have done the greatest harm to trans people by chasing away from our campuses those who simply wanted to tease it out. One moment, please. I've just started. And I really regret to say, another one of my regrets this evening, When we listen to all of the noise, or we read all of the noise on X and on Instagram and whatever it might be, or just in the media, we'd like to think that universities are the refuges that we would visit to raise the level. We say universities; those would be the place where we can have the discussions, right? Where we can get a step beyond all the noise. And yet, if you look at our universities today, those are the last places to go. The more controversial an issue is, the more it needs to be discussed, the less likely it is that you'll find any serious discussion at a university. And I think, and not just here in Britain, by the way, it's happening more and more throughout the Western world, and I think that's tragic. I think that's tragic. Another example, and the trans debates, it's been a perfect example of it. Precisely the kind of issue that should have been debated in universities, seriously, properly. Instead, you're told that you're a fascist simply because you want to raise some questions, and I've followed very carefully the views of feminists who have wanted to challenge the trans positions. As I say, I disagree with them, but I only know that I disagree with them because I'm willing to read them. And I have actually invited some on campus. Why did I invite them? Why did I invite them? So I could challenge them. That's debate. Similarly, Israel-Palestine came up several times this evening. I have both written and spoken against censorship on both sides, which has constantly marred, particularly academia. There have been massive events of all kinds about the Israel-Palestine problem, and virtually none of them have been serious academic debates. Universities should be ashamed. And if you are ashamed of that, you have to oppose this motion. And you have to think again, what are the dangers to free speech? Well, leaving aside lack of logic, the dangers to free speech are historical parochialism. Whether it be a historical parochialism, an inability to understand the dangers on the right, which I entirely agree, every single one that's been named, and the dangers on the left. Yeah, North Korea, not great either. Or again, from Iran and so forth. I'm glad that I'm stimulating so many responses. Okay, I'll take one then. I mean, if you're going to twist my arm. Yeah. Wait, hold on a second. Let's hear from someone who hasn't spoken yet, please. No.
Please keep POIs short and phrase the question.
How do you see your point in relation with perpetuating kind of systematic oppression by portraying it as discussion or debate?
Oh God, I'm so glad you put this question, thank you. And I think I must have about 10 answers to it. First of all, why would activism and discussion somehow be mutually exclusive? That's the great danger to free speech, is this idea. It's either one or the other. This idea of academia as the ivory tower, that has a lot of historical vintage, as it turns out. In German, it's called the Lügenpresse. This is what the Nazis used, although we heard it at that time and still today on the far left and the far right. The idea, right, the media is lying, right? The academy, the intellectuals, can't trust them, can't trust what's going on there. Why would activism and discussion? I would like to see a world where activism and discussion are fueling each other, where an activist is not so small as to be unable, as to need to censor the other side. I'm happy to take another question.
You need to conclude within a minute, so you can take it if you want, but you've got a minute left.
I just want to raise something about your earlier point. You talk about sort of trans rights and this idea that, people who oppose trans people existing as they are being pushed out and silenced. I mean, to be quite honest, and to bring up Lord Young's example of the Cambridge University Society for Women, I don't think we can call it cancelling and silencing if they're getting an article and an op-ed in the Telegraph every week. I think there's a real asymmetry, again, between the examples you're bringing up in terms of, you know, the cancellation on the left and then the structural oppression on the right, no?
Yeah, you've just made my point. So, then, yeah, you really think the Telegraph replaces what should be going on at Cambridge University? You really believe this? I mean, again, this I find so tragic. This I find so tragic. It's just the same as, it's either activism or the ivory tower. It's either the Telegraph or the university. Really? Really? Go ahead.
None of the students who founded the Society for Women have been removed from the university. I don't see the point.
No, but I'm simply I'm simply talking about silencing. I'm simply talking about silence. We're here talking about free speech. We're not talking about employment law.
Sorry, you need to conclude, I'm afraid. No, you can make a final remark, but you need to conclude within 30 seconds or so.
Can I take one more from the floor?
Fine, one more.
Over-exaggerating historically. Students have always been the subject of criticism and discussion. This has always been torture. And don't you think you're really sort of pulling out stereotypes of students rather than making a sober historical judgment? I think we're all here today as a testament to the fact we still believe in these things. And don't you think you're potentially catastrophizing this into some kind of existential crisis, which it's just not?
Okay, nothing I said did this at all. Right? I'm simply observing that on both the far right and on the far left, and in other places, if we again broaden geography and history, there are threats to free speech. That's all we need. If we agree with that, we've defeated the motion.
Thank you, Eric, for that brilliant speech. We now move to the voting portion of the evening, but before that, the Floor Speech Prize, a £50 voucher for Cambridge's finest establishment, goes to Farron from Selwyn College. Now, in this house, we vote with our feet. If you want to vote aye, you need to go to the right. If you are no, you need to go to the left. And if you want to abstain, please walk through the middle. We shall announce the results in the bar afterwards, where there are also complimentary chips. Thank you, and good night.